On May 7, 1945, only hours after Germany capitulated, General George S. Patton sat across from Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower inside a seized German mansion near Frankfurt. American troops were celebrating victory throughout Europe. But Patton wasn't celebrating. He had come to deliver a message that would end their friendship, cost him his command within months, and be dismissed by Washington and the press as madness. "We're going to have to fight them sooner or later," Patton said. "Let's do it now while our army is intact, and while we can win." He wasn't referring to the Germans. He meant the Soviet Union. Eisenhower stared at him in disbelief. He had spent years holding together a fragile alliance with the Soviets. The American public adored Uncle Joe Stalin, and newspapers portrayed the Red Army as heroic liberators. Now Patton was proposing that the U.S. strike its own wartime ally. "George," Eisenhower replied, "you don't understand politics. The war is over. We're going home." Patton realized something unsettling in that moment. Eisenhower knew Patton wasn't wrong, but he wasn't willing to act. What followed became one of the most consequential silences in U.S. military history. Patton had recognized the Soviet threat before anyone in Washington dared to acknowledge it. He believed that while the Red Army was depleted and American forces were at peak strength, the United States had a brief window to reshape post-war Europe. But politicians and senior generals were more concerned with public opinion than with strategic reality. Patton's Third Army had advanced farther into Germany than any other Allied force. His tanks were deep in Czechoslovakia, and advance elements were close enough to Berlin to strike. Everywhere he went, one thing alarmed him: the Soviet presence. American intelligence officers reported mass rape, systematic plunder, executions of civilians, and entire populations being deported to Soviet labor camps. In April 1945, Patton wrote to his wife, Beatrice, "I have no desire to understand them, except to know how much lead or iron it takes to kill them. The Russians give me the impression of a force to be feared in any future world order." Patton saw clearly what diplomats in Washington refused to face. The Soviet Union was not a temporary partner against Hitler, but an expansionist totalitarian empire. While American officials naively believed Stalin would honor promises of free elections, Patton interviewed liberated American POWs who described Soviet captivity as worse than the Germans. Soviet troops stole their food, boots, and possessions. Officers who protested were beaten or shot. Soviet forces dismantled factories, shipped entire industrial plants to Russia, imposed communist regimes across Eastern Europe, and eliminated anti-Nazi resistance fighters who now opposed Soviet control. By May 1945, Patton had formulated a strategic plan. Not angry rambling, but a sober military proposal based on intelligence assessments. His reasoning was simple. The Soviets had lost 27 million people. Their army was exhausted, overstretched, and dependent on captured supplies. Their logistical lines stretched thousands of miles. The U.S. had overwhelming air superiority and fully supplied forces. The Soviets lacked strategic bombers and robust anti-aircraft defenses. Soviet tanks were numerous but unreliable after years of non-stop fighting. And most importantly, Patton believed Soviet morale was fragile. "If we push eastward," he told Under-Secretary of War Robert Patterson, "a large number of them will surrender or desert." Patton even proposed using German POWs. "There are hundreds of thousands who would rather fight the Russians than go to the camps." Washington was horrified. But Patton's logic was cold and clear. Germans feared the Soviets far more than the Americans. Eisenhower rejected the idea. Officially, the reasons were logistical and political. Americans wanted their sons home, Congress demanded rapid demobilization, and forces were positioned to occupy Germany, not advance into Poland. But the true reason was political suicide. Truman was continuing Roosevelt's cooperative approach to Stalin, and the Yalta framework was still sacrosanct. Eisenhower himself was being discussed as a potential president. Launching a war against the Soviets would ruin him. Eisenhower believed diplomacy could temper Soviet ambitions. Patton believed only strength could. Eisenhower thought like a statesman. Patton thought like a warrior. Winston Churchill, however, reached the same conclusions as Patton. He warned Truman that Soviet intentions were dangerous and urged Allied forces to move east before the Soviets entrenched themselves. Churchill even commissioned Operation Unthinkable, a plan for pushing Soviet forces out of Eastern Europe using rearmed German divisions alongside US and British troops. British military planners concluded it was feasible, if executed immediately. Truman dismissed the idea at once. Patton felt vindicated when he learned that Churchill had proposed a similar course of action. "At least one man understands what we're facing," he said. But the American press turned against him. His remarks about rearming German soldiers and confronting the Soviets were leaked and twisted. Columnists mocked his judgment and implied mental instability. None reported the atrocities his intelligence officers documented. The public narrative hardened. Patton was a brilliant wartime commander who couldn't adapt to peace. By September 1945, Eisenhower, under pressure from Washington, removed Patton from command, officially citing his comments about denazification. Everyone understood the real reason. Patton refused to stay quiet about the Soviet threat. In his final months, Patton continued warning Washington. His letters read like predictions. "Keep our boots polished and bayonets sharp. That is the only language the Red Army understands. If we fail, we have beaten the Germans only to lose the war." In early December, he met again with Patterson, predicting the Soviets would permanently occupy Eastern Europe, spread communism westward, and eventually force a military confrontation. "We'll fight them eventually," he said. "In 5 years, or 10 or 20, we'll wish we'd done it in 1945. 3 days later, December 9th, 1945, Patton was gravely injured in a car accident near Mannheim. He was paralyzed and died on December 21st. The suspicious timing fueled conspiracy theories, though no evidence of foul play ever emerged. Everything Patton foresaw unfolded. Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, abandoned promises of free elections, communist coups and dictatorships, mass repression, executions and labor camps, a Cold War lasting 45 years, trillions spent and millions killed in proxy wars, the Soviet atomic bomb, the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Global communist expansion, Patton's central claim, that 1945 was the moment of maximum opportunity, proved historically significant. Whether a war against the Soviets would have succeeded is debatable. Whether it was politically viable is not. But his warnings were validated again and again. Later leaders, Kennan, Truman, Reagan, and many others, would articulate doctrines that echoed Patton's 1945 assessment. Conservative thinkers cited him as a prophet. Liberal critics dismissed him as a dangerous militarist. Yet his predictions materialized with stunning accuracy. Patton's tragedy was being right at the wrong time. He recognized the Soviet threat before anyone else acknowledged it. He proposed action while it might still have shaped history. He was silenced before he could be proven right. As later generations fought the Cold War he had hoped to prevent, his question lingered. When should America confront a rising threat? Early, while it is weak, or later, when the cost is far higher? Patton's answer never changed. Face danger while you still hold the advantage. Tell the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. And history ensured his voice would not be forgotten.
If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe to Traces of Valor. Your support keeps these forgotten heroes alive. And tell us, what did this story make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.